National Guard troops could be dispatched to cities facing possible insurrection, said Jeffrey Runge, Chief Medical Officer at the Department of Homeland Security. And the Department of Veterans Affairs has developed a drive-through medical exam. Now there's a picture of a guy at one of these drive-through medical exams who's actually getting some type of vaccination from a lady at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And this is to quickly assess patients who suspect they have been infected. Please don't do me any favors. Now this is from Barbara Lowe Fisher, co-founder of the National Vaccine Information Center. She says, if the state can track down and force citizens against their will to be injected with biologicals of unknown toxicity today, there will be no limit on what individual freedoms the state can take away in the name of the greater good tomorrow. And there's her website that you can go to take proactive steps against this Senate Bill 1873. This is from the Wall Street Journal, page A8 of 21306. It's entitled G8 Nations Shape Plan to Fight Diseases. And this is an actual picture of that meeting. The U.S. and its wealthy allies are moving to approve a first-of-its-kind plan to encourage pharmaceutical companies to develop vaccines for diseases that afflict countries too poor to afford them. We've already seen what kind of horrific vaccination treatment some of these countries have gotten, including our own, America. Under an advanced market commitment plan, the G8 nations would promise to subsidize the purchase of new vaccines for between $800 million and $6 billion. In light of what we've just read, it doesn't seem like a very attractive offer. This is from the Union Leader News Service, 10/26/05, flu shot blitz planned. 3 New Hampshire communities are making plans to give out a single blast of 5,000 flu shots on 11/19/05. As part of a drill to prepare for widespread epidemic, the effort is being undertaken to test the state's ability to render emergency mass inoculations as the threat of avian flu unfolds. The drill will test the ability of health officials to issue mass vaccinations and judicial issues involving quarantine and isolation. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security is paying for the flu shots. So again, they've been gearing up for this for a long time. The Council on Foreign Relations, in its recent journal report, says, quote, if a global flu pandemic ensues, and this is very important, this part, because we're talking about vaccinations, but in light of this statement, the vaccination issue really doesn't hold up. Now this is Council of Foreign Relations, quote, and they say, in short order, the global economy would shut down. This is in regard to a global flu pandemic. Vaccines would have no impact on the course of the virus in the first months and would likely play an extremely limited role worldwide during the following 12 to 18 months of the pandemic. That's from Foreign Affairs, July of August in 2005. And this is the same condition we're in today. I went up on the North Carolina Pandemic Flu Vaccination Plan, Department of Health and Human Services. This is Appendix C5, January of 2008, and they say on this particular website that the vaccine will not be available until 4 to 6 months after the initial outbreak of the pandemic. But this stuff kills very quick. H5N1, even in its non-mutated version, it kills you very quickly. And they're talking 4 to 6 months after the initial outbreak that there wouldn't be a vaccine at that point anyway, up until that point. And the reason this is because this vaccine has to be engineered from the mutated, virulent, human-to-human pandemic strain. And when that strain develops, well, it's going to spread rapidly, most likely. Now, from a biblical standpoint, why should we look at these issues? Well, 2 Corinthians 2:11 says, lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. This is one of the reasons we want to look at this. Hosea 4:6 says, my children are destroyed for lack of knowledge. So it's very important, you know, what knowledge you're looking at here. 1 Corinthians 2:15 says, but he that is spiritual judgeth all things. These are things we need to judge as Christians. Now, going further, this is from the Vaccine Liberation. Now remember, I'm just quoting from these sources, okay? And this is what the Vaccine Liberation said. They said this in the publication they put out on 12/1/03, and it's entitled "U.S. Vaccines Cause the Spanish Flu." Now this is what they're saying, and we see a picture here in the right-hand corner of the Spanish flu of 1918, and everybody's wearing their surgical masks, even though those types of masks really don't do anything against the airborne H5N1 or at the time they were dealing with Spanish flu. Now this is quoting from their article. They state, in 1918 the Spanish flu started in the American military camp Funston, Fort Riley, amongst World War I troops who received the vaccinations administered by the military. That flu strain only appeared briefly once again, according to the U.S. Atlanta CDC. This was in 1976, and again it struck at U.S. Army Camp Fort Dix, amongst recently vaccinated troops, and no one else ever. Fort Dix is known to have been a vaccine trial center. Wonder why that wasn't on the news. Here's another one. This is from John Christian Ryder, 2/22/06, newswithviews.com. The full link is at the bottom there. This is entitled "Bird Flu or Weapons Grade Flu." Again, another picture of the Spanish flu of 1918. The CDC comparing the original H1N1 avian genome with the mutated H3N2 Fort Riley strain that caused the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918-1919 with the Chinese strain H5N1. So here's what they're saying. They're comparing the H1N1, which is like the original template for the bird flu. They're comparing that with the mutated H3N2, which caused the Spanish flu of 1918, and they're comparing that also with the H5N1 strain. Now the CDC believes that the H5N1 will mutate into an airborne influenza virus, as did the H3N2. Why does the CDC believe this? Because the U.S. military created the first military strain of influenza. H1N1 was morphed into H3N2. Spanish flu was created at Fort Riley, Kansas on April 1918 from the naturally occurring avian virus H1N1. Pretty strong stuff. But again, these are the experts. This is an excerpt from Chapter 2 of the Swine Flu Expose from Eleanor McBean. She's a PhD. It was entitled "The Flu, 1918 and Now." Now this is from Eleanor McBean, PhD. She said, quote, "I was an on-the-spot observer of the 1918 influenza epidemic. All the doctors and people who were living at the time of the 1918 Spanish influenza epidemic say it was the most terrible disease the world had ever had. Strong men, hale and hearty, one day would be dead the next. The disease had the characteristics of the Black Death, added to typhoid, diphtheria, pneumonia, smallpox, paralysis, and all the diseases the people had been vaccinated with immediately following World War I. Continuing, she says, practically the entire population had been injected or seeded with a dozen or more diseases or toxic serums. When all those doctor-made diseases started breaking out all at once, it was tragic. She goes on to say, that pandemic dragged on for 2 years, kept alive with the addition of more poison drugs administered by the doctors who tried to suppress the symptoms. As far as I could find out, the flu shot only hit the vaccinated. Those who had refused the shots escaped the flu. My family had refused all the vaccinations, so we remained well all the time." End of quote. There's the link to go see the full transcript. A nation that is ignorant of its past is a nation that is ripe for deception and manipulation. And there's another picture of the Spanish flu of 1918. This is coming back to America when the avian